So this is the wheel throwing practice sheet. This is where you'll record the work that you've done. You can see the filled out sheet here. You're going to look at how you centered, how much you like the cylinder or bowl that you made. You're going to give yourself style points. You're going to evaluate how even the wall thickness is. You're going to evaluate the overall experience and then put a height for your cylinder. And then have do a drawing of it and then have the teacher sign you off for the day. Okay, so when you're ready to work on the wheel, here's the wheel sign-up sheet. You're going to put your name under the wheel that you're working on. The wheels start on the left as number 1 and to the far right is number 10. Alright, so here's what you need when you're going to work on the wheel. You will want a sponge and 2 containers for one for water and one to put your clay scraps in. Usually put the one for the water on my left with the sponge and then that one in the middle. You'll also want a wooden modeling tool that's pointed on one end and a wooden rib. A couple of other tools that will be handy would be a needle tool and a chamois and a cutoff wire. Additionally, you'll need a piece of clay that's 1 1/4 pounds and you'll want a bat. Now that is what you throw your clay on. This is the wheel head. These are bat pins, so take the smaller hole on the bat, line it up with the bat pin, and then lock your bat in. Another thing you would probably want to bring would be a hand towel to use in class. This will help you wipe your hands while you're working. An apron is very helpful to use. The hand towel I would generally put over my right leg if I'm right-handed. If I was left-handed, I'd put it over my left leg because the way the wheel spins, this direction here, the clay ends up on this leg quite a bit. Okay, so these are the switches for the wheel. This is the power button. Up is on. And then this one is the direction the wheel is going to turn. So you always want the switch in the forward position. So all the way forward facing the wall. There are these wheel throwing cheat sheets between every other wheel. They talk about the basics of centering, opening, and pulling. It is a great idea to review these when you're first starting out on the wheel, pretty much every time you get on there. Alright, so I'm going to show you how to throw a cylinder. Start by having your chair all the way up against the edge of the wheel here. When you sit, you want to be as close to the wheel, pretty much as you can be. Alright, so start by finding the center of your wheel. You should be all set up at this point. You've already signed up for which wheel you're going to be working on. I find the center of the wheel, just get my finger wet and just make a spot in the middle there. I'm going to put my clay right there as close to the center as possible. The closer it starts in the center, the better chance I have of success with this. Alright, so you can see how the clay looks. It's got definitely some movement to it. So what I want to do now is the first thing is I'm going to center the clay. And there are several steps in centering. I want to attach the clay well to the wheel. And then I want to cone it up and down, and then ultimately I want it centered. So get my hands wet, get the clay wet, and your elbows are going to be attached to your thighs or hips, and you're going to just lean into your clay, kind of pushing it forward or towards the wall. As I lean into it, I'm going to help attach the clay better to the wheel head. Okay, so if I stop that now, you can see that the clay is got this little skirt around the edge. It's attached well. And so now I'm going to go ahead and cone the clay up and then down. Usually I will have the wheel going full speed while I'm doing this step, and then I take my foot off the pedal so I don't slow it up or speed it down by accident. So I'm going to lean into the clay, And as I'm leaning into it, I'm going to squeeze my hands together more from the bottom than anything else and bring the clay out. Okay, if the clay gets sticky and it sticks to your hands, it might cut or tear off. So you want to make sure that you're keeping everything nice and well lubricated with the water. It'll create a lot of slip as you're going. Once it's coned up, I'm going to cone it down. The way I do that is my right arm is attached to my hip. I'm going to lean into the clay so it actually moves over a little bit and then push down with the other hand. I'll usually do that coning up and coning down twice. Okay, so now the clay is pretty well centered. If you slow the wheel down, if you look at it, it shouldn't look as if it's moving at all. It should look nice and stable. Now if this clay at the bottom here bothers you, like right along the edge, you can take the wooden rib and just remove that, like that. Put that in your scrap bucket. All right, so the next step now that it's centered is going to be opening up the clay. And I usually have the wheel going fast when I open. And what you're going to do is just attach both elbows right there at your hip joints, right along your thighs, and then both thumbs are going to be in the center of the clay and you're going to push down. You don't want to push all the way through the clay or you won't have a bottom to what you're making. So you want to go really about 3/4 of an inch, sorry, about 3/8 of an inch from the bottom, about like that. Okay. And once I think I'm there, I pull my thumbs apart a little bit to open it up. And then if I want to check that, what I would do is grab my needle tool, put my needle tool into the clay, slide my finger down to where it touches the clay, and I can see that that right there is how far into it I am, which is about what I want, about 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is compress the bottom to make it a little bit stronger. So I'm going to take my wooden rib, I'm going to use this bottom edge here, the points up, and I'm going to use the rounded edge against the rounded edge. I'm going to work to the right. So whenever you're working on your piece, think about working pretty much from 3 o'clock. So on a clock, this is 12, this is 6, this is 3, so between 3 and 4 o'clock down here. So I'm going to just push the clay to the right, push the rib to the right like this against the edge and then down against the bottom. And that compresses the bottom, makes it stronger, it's less likely to have a crack when we're done. Okay, so I have now opened up my clay. So I attached the clay to my wheel, I coned it up and down so it was well centered. I've opened it up. Now the next step is pulling. This is the fun part when you actually see things really starting to happen. I'm going to slow my wheel down to kind of a medium speed. And I like to pull with my sponge. When I first started throwing, I did not use a sponge a lot for the pulling, and I would highly recommend it. It makes the job a little bit easier. So put a little bit of water inside, and then what's going to happen is you're going to take your two hands and put the sponge down for a minute. You're basically squeezing your two fingers together. I use my middle fingers on smaller pieces, and as you squeeze them, it's like pinching the clay. So the clay has to go somewhere, so it generally will go up. The bat is against the bottom, so going up is where it will go. If you're squeezing your fingers together and pinching it, it's going to squeeze the clay and then bring it up. A couple of other things: attach your elbows. Your elbows should always be attached to your thighs or your ribs. And then I like to keep my hands attached together, so I'll usually have my thumbs somehow connected at the top as well. So just a little twist to that is I'll put the sponge over my finger there, and it just grips the clay a little bit better on the outside. So both fingers together, squeezing more from the outside than the inside, and then bring the clay up like that. Okay, so let's do another pull. It's called pulling the clay. Now as you're working, that spinning or that centrifugal force will cause your clay to go outward. If you don't want it to go out as much as it is, get the clay wet, get your hands wet, and then you can collar the clay. That's where you'll bring your hands in and bring the clay in like that. Okay, so I'm going to do another pool. Oh. And that sometimes happens. Okay, so here I am with another cylinder that I threw pretty much about where the last one was. I'm going to collar it in slightly. Now you can also use your wooden rib to help firm up the outside. I'm going to take some of this extra clay off the bottom, so I'm just going to clean that up like that. And I'm going to slide my rib along the outer edge with my hand on the inside. I'm not putting a lot of pressure. This is just kind of firming it up a little bit. Okay, so I want to get a little bit of extra clay off the bottom, so I'm going to push this corner in. Another way to do that is with the wooden stick. You can take and, once again, keep your arms or elbows attached to your thighs. I usually have my hand resting on the edge of the splash pan. I'm going to cut into the clay. Scrape this extra clay out of the bottom. Okay, so that just kind of cleans the bottom up down there. And when you cut it off, you want it to go underneath just very slightly. You don't want the bottom of your piece ever to curve out. That gets a real fragile edge that chips real easily. Okay, so I'm pretty well close to being done. What I'm going to do is take my sponge, squeeze out the water, rinse it out, and I'm going to get the extra water out of the bottom of my pot. And clean this clay off of the bat. So the last thing would be to use the chamois to make the rim real nice. So the chamois is just this soft piece of leather that when it's wet it gets real slippery with the clay, and you just run it across the top edge to give you a nice rounded edge like that. You can also use the chamois or your fingers to do different things. You can have the edge curve outward like this. You can play at this point and kind of experiment doing different things. But when it's done, you want to go ahead and cut this piece open so you can check and see how it looks. If I was going to keep this piece, this was one that I was going to keep. I take my wire, make sure it's tight, not loose. You're going to hold it down to your bat, slide it all the way underneath your piece like that. But for my first 3 cylinders, my first 3 bowls, they're practice pieces. You're going to throw them and you're going to cut them open to see what they look like. So slide your wire underneath it, right to the center, and then carefully pull it up through the bottom of the clay. And you're going to take a look and see what the profile of it looks like. And that's what you're going to record on your wheel practice sheet. So if I look at this one right here, this is pretty even. It flares out very slightly at the bottom, and then it's pretty flat across the bottom there too. So it's pretty good. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably call this one a 9. Okay, so now we're going to throw